If you are like me, then your Proton pack has been sitting in its box where you left it after you first opened it back in February. While the display stand it came with is very nice, I don't have the floor, cabinet, or shelf space for it, so I wanted to make something that would allow me to hang it up for display. Even though it is completely unnecessary since it will be covered up most of the time, I wanted the style of the wall mount to match the Proton pack, so my idea was to have it look like it was made of steel plate and welded together. A link to the finished version of these plans, along with a tool and material list, can be found in the description below. The tools I used for rough cuts include a speed square and a tape measure for the layout, and a table saw and miter saw for the cutting. Substitute recommendations that could be used include a circular saw or a jigsaw that I will be using later. The materials that I used here were scrap plywood that I had as leftovers from previous projects. Pine could also be used and purchased in sizes close to what is required for this project at Lowe's or Home Depot. For the finish cuts, I again used a speed square and a tape measure for the layout. But then I used a jigsaw with a clean cut blade and a router with a straight cut blade. The 12-inch speed square made layout relatively quick, and the measurements for the cuts do not need to be too precise so long as they are square. To get the wall mount to look like it is welded together, I used a router with a straight bit to remove some of the material so I could fill it back later with acrylic. This part is completely optional and does nothing else but to make the wall mount look cooler. The depth of the straight bit was set between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. Reflecting back, I should have used a V-bit to make the cut because if I had been welding these pieces together, I would have used a beveled edge. To help with the cut, I used quick clamps and a smooth piece of wood as a guide. The guide needs to be offset to account for the space between the router bit to the edge of the router guide. To start the finish process, I sanded all of the pieces with a palm sander that had a 100 grit sandpaper. I used a utility knife to take down some of the edges that could damage the sandpaper on the palm sander. Next, I use wood glue and quick clamps to put the back pieces together. All that needs to be done is to line up the edges so that it looks and feels like it is one piece. The glue should be given time to dry, and then the edges should be sanded if needed. To finish off the welding look, I applied a paintable acrylic to the grooves I cut with the router. The main technique I used to make it look like a welding bead was to squeeze the trigger to apply a blueberry-sized amount of acrylic at a time, and then move the nozzle back 1/4 of an inch. The acrylic needs about 20 to 30 minutes to dry so that the outside can harden. Then I used a putty knife to flatten out the beads of acrylic to complete the welding look. Another hour or two should be given to allow the acrylic time to dry. To begin the painting process, I started with a latex primer. I wanted the finish of the latex to be as flat as possible, so I used a 2-inch sponge brush to apply the primer. Unfortunately, it wasn't until after I finished painting that I realized I forgot to drill the mounting holes. This meant that I had to resand and remove any of the graphite markings before I spray painted. The holes that I drilled were with a 1/8 inch bit, with the holes on the face piece also being countersunk to allow the screws to sit flush. Finally, I used a metallic spray paint in light coats until I had the finish that I wanted. I wanted my Proton pack to be centered on the wall I was hanging it on, so first I used a tape measure to find the center of the wall. Then I used a stud finder to see if there was a stud there. Next I used a level to ensure that the back plate was plumb before drilling the holes into the wall with a 5/64 inch bit. The screws that I used for mounting to the wall were size number 6 and were 1 5/8 inch long wood screws. The screws that I used to attach the face plate to the back plate were number 12 2-inch long wood screws. And now that I've finished editing, let's see how many people will possibly watch this video. Oh,